Welcome to the 23rd episode of Let's Talk About Electric Vehicles. My name is Teresa, I'm an economist, and I try to answer general questions about electrified transportation systems. I am very happy and very excited to introduce you to my co-host, Theo. Theo, maybe do you want to say a few words about yourself before we continue?
Hi all, I'm Theo. I'm a software engineering type and clean tech enthusiast, and I'm very interested in electric vehicles. I had a ton of fun helping out on the last episode, so I'm back for part 2.
Yay, it's great to have you here in the podcast. And together we will continue talking about converting gasoline cars into electric vehicles. Okay, then let's dig in. Last week we learned about the history of electric vehicle conversions from the mid-1800s until today. Remember that the simplicity, the cleanness, and the power of electric motors has always been very attractive. What was holding the technology back from broad commercialization or from frequent EV conversions, though, was the battery technology.
That's right, and we also discussed that battery technology has been improving quickly, enabling huge improvements in range, performance, and cost. Coincidentally, last week, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry was given to 3 scientists who developed and improved the lithium-based batteries that power today's electric cars.
That's so interesting. We should totally do another battery chemistry episode. There's so much to talk about.
Seriously.
As for today, we will focus on the technical aspects of converting an internal combustion engine, and we will unravel the pros and cons. First, let's talk about the major pieces that are involved in the conversion, so how they are installed and what interesting decisions may be involved with converting a gas car. Tell me, Theo, where does every conversion start off?
Well, first you need a donor car. Which one depends on a lot of factors, but generally you want to have something that's reasonably light, has a manual transmission, and will fit all the pieces that you choose. For this discussion, you can think about things in terms of a normal small car like a Honda Civic.
What's the checklist for the donor car? You said, okay, reasonably light, so it doesn't require too much energy to move the vehicle around, and manual transmission, so you don't have to deal with all of the electronics, right? I guess the older the car, the better, because the older the car, the fewer electronics that would be irritated and might light up all of the control lights.
Yep, definitely simpler is better, although an expert converter who has experience with a specific newer car model can do cool things with existing electronics, like using the fuel gauge to show the battery level.
So, okay, imagine that we have the perfect donor car. What next? Can we just add the motor?
Yes, you can choose AC or DC, that's alternating current or direct current motor. AC gives you regenerative braking because the motor can actually double as a generator. And that regenerative braking adds a bit of range, something like 10% or more or less depending on driving conditions. DC motors are simpler and cheaper, although not that much cheaper these days. And then the motor is going to be bolted in where the car's engine used to be. Most home converters, like you said, they use manual transmission cars, and they bolt the electric motor to the manual transmission. And the manual transmission is there, and partly just because it's convenient, it was already there. And you don't really need to shift an electric motor. It has enough torque that you could lock the engine in one gear and never shift. But a lot of converters do shift in order to keep the motor running at optimal RPM on like long trips and things like that. And then as far as automatic transmissions goes, it's possible to use an electric motor with an automatic transmission, but it's tricky because automatic transmissions are designed to match the characteristics of the engine that they were built with. And many require that the engine idle when the car's not moving, which of course you wouldn't want to do with an electric motor.
Okay, so I understand that it's possible to use an automatic car as a donor car, but it just makes your life much harder. The electric motor is one thing, but what about the battery?
Exactly, you need a battery and a battery management system. The battery stores energy, of course. The battery management system makes sure the battery stays healthy, and especially that it doesn't overheat. It does this by a combination of limiting current during charging and controlling the temperature. By the way, when choosing a battery these days, it really seems like lithium-ion is the only way to go. You could do lead acid, but the range would be greatly hampered. And I've also heard of people doing nickel cadmium or nickel metal hydride, but it seems like those are very rare.
Okay, so you're getting a lithium-ion battery, but then depending on how much range you would like to have, you choose the battery capacity accordingly. There are helpful calculators that can figure this out for a specific setup, but very roughly, 30 kilowatt hours will get you 100 miles of range. If you're going to have a big battery pack, so a battery pack with high capacity, you also need to think about whether it will fit and also where you want to put the cells. You can expect that 30 kilowatt hours of batteries to have at least half the volume of a single bed mattress. As for weight, you can expect around 200 kilograms, which is around 400 pounds, if not even more. Some battery cells are more weight efficient and more space efficient than others. By the way, people that I talk to use old Tesla battery cells. Apparently, those are very efficient in both terms, space and weight.
Yeah, and not too bad price-wise, surprisingly, and also available via eBay and other sources. It's really amazing the work that Tesla has done on battery technology, both the batteries themselves and also the management and cooling system.
So it's a bit of a trade-off decision. The smaller the car, the lighter, and therefore the less power is required, but you may don't have enough room for the battery. You may even have to sacrifice the back seat or something. If you go for a bigger car, however, you'll have more room for the battery cells, but you will also need more battery cells in order to power the heavier vehicle. I guess you have to play a little Tetris with the battery cells in order to fit all of your desired battery capacity in the chassis. There's probably some space where the tank used to be too, but the more you distribute the cells, the more wiring probably is needed.
Yeah, exactly. All of this Tetrising adds up to pickup trucks being pretty popular for conversions. You can put the bulk of the batteries either in or under the bed, and it's relatively easy to do because there's not much else going on in those areas. And then also pickup trucks are light for their size.
Okay, so now we have a donor car, check. We have the motor, check. And we have the battery with its management system, check. What else do we need?
Well, you need a speed controller. Basically, this component is in charge of taking the huge amount of energy stored in the batteries and giving it to the electric motor in the right amount depending on the position of your right foot, and then at a rate that doesn't destroy the motor or your tires. And then an AC speed controller also deals with converting the DC power from the battery into AC to power the motor.
And what about the brakes?
Yeah, brakes are definitely important. The brakes are based on a vacuum system that in gas engine cars, that vacuum is generated by the engine itself, and then that vacuum assists you when you put your foot on the brakes. But in an electric car, there is no side effect gas engine vacuum thing going on, so you actually have to have a little pump that creates a vacuum and then store that vacuum in a little flask. There are other electronics needed too, which depends greatly on the specific donor car. For example, like we mentioned earlier, the fuel gauge that you might want to replace or reuse. Or if the donor car is a newer model, it may be drive-by-wire, so things like gas pedal position would need to be linked between the CAN bus and the electric motor's controller and throttle.
Excuse me, the what bus? The CAN bus? Does this stand for Canada bus?
Yep, Canada bus, that's right. No, actually, unfortunately, the CAN bus is a name for the network of little computers that work together to make a modern car work. Like all modern cars have a CAN bus.
Okay, no party bus touring through Canada.
No, very sadly, no.
Okay. So that's everything we need?
No, you also need a DC to DC converter. So your electric car battery that you just bought and that is the half the size of a mattress is going to put out on the order of 200 volts, and all the low voltage stuff that's in your car still needs to run at 12 volts. So you need something that will take that 200 volts down to 12 volts to either charge a battery or run the stuff directly.
Okay.
And then you also need a charger, and you may need, depending on whether your car needs one, a power steering pump, and depending on whether you are in Florida or Canada, you might need heating or cooling or both.
Well, thank you for introducing us to the technical requirements for converting a gas car into an electric car. Coming over to the financial requirements now, which is, in my opinion, equally important for someone considering doing this. Therefore, let's talk money.
So just looking at the parts, it breaks down very roughly to 10,000 US dollars for all the non-battery parts, plus another 10,000 US dollars for the for a 30 kilowatt hour, around 100 miles of battery capacity. So that's 10 and 10, so roughly $20,000 gets you the parts to convert a car to go 100 miles.
Which is about 27,000 Canadian dollars for converting a car with around 150 kilometers driving range.
Ha, thanks for the translation. I'm still learning to speak metric. So then if you want to have a professional do the conversion, there's additional cost. You can figure maybe 5 to 10K US, depending on the donor car complexity.
So I have a question. What if you don't care about range and don't care about storage in your car and you just want to do it yourself and minimize the cost? What is the lowest possible cost for playing around with EV conversion?
Yeah, I mean, you can get it down pretty low. If you're cool with a tiny car and a short range, you just want to drive back and forth to the store, you're up for scrounging used parts, and doing the work yourself, of course. You could do a whole conversion for under 10,000 US dollars.
Okay, so that is as low as it can get in terms of price. Just to recall, all of the numbers that we are mentioning right now do not include the cost of the donor car.
Yep, we're talking as if you already have the perfect donor car in your garage just waiting for you to convert it. To review, with roughly 20,000 US dollars or 27,000 Canadian invested and a donor car that you already had sitting perfectly in your garage, you'll have a 100-mile or 150 kilometer electric car.
Well done, well done.
Thank you. I had a good teacher. So then, for comparison, to a production car, a new Nissan Leaf has around 150 miles range and costs around 30,000 US dollars. In Canada, which I've heard is a place.
Excuse me?
Then with the federal subsidy of 5,000 Canadian dollars, the Nissan Leaf would be around 37,000 Canadian dollars.
Canada is a place. So, upfront cost saving is probably not a reason for converting a car to electric, but is there something else to keep in mind when DIY converting your car?
Well, yeah, there are some other things. Unfortunately, we have to start with more bad news. The resale value of the converted car will generally not be very good because no one wants to buy a project unless it's very professional, and even then it also needs to be a very special car in some way, and even then it's hard to get your money out, honestly. Another asterisk is around safety. It's unlikely for a converted car to be as safe as an OEM or a factory built car, because you're using the original chassis, but you're using it in a way that wasn't intended, i.e. by sticking hundreds of pounds of batteries in it. And then finally, on the not so great news, registration is interesting. In the US and possibly many other places, it's pretty easy, so there's no big downside there. But in some countries, there may be costs associated with getting the conversion inspected and certified for roadworthiness. For example, one converter in Denmark found that it would cost the equivalent of 20,000 US dollars just to get the car inspected and registered.
So actually here in Canada, it's very similar to the US. There are no inspections for DIY EVs required, which is actually really, really dangerous. I mean, good for DIY people because they don't have to worry about it, but actually really, really dangerous. I hope that the legislature will adjust soon. I was talking to Jim Stell, the founder of Go Electric in Calgary the other day, and he told me about a guy who tried to charge his converted vehicle and burned down his own house. So therefore, we highly recommend that you consult a professional or someone who has experience with converting at each step of your conversion. We will attach some helpful links to the show notes. Anyways, please tell me some good news.
Okay. Well, first of all, Canada is awesome. But also, the first piece of electric car related good news is revolves around efficiency from a CO2 equivalent point of view. So because you're starting with a donor car, you're effectively reusing all that steel and rubber and wiring and electronics that were part of the donor car, except for the engine. And according to the estimates that I could find, the non-engine parts of a gas car create about 10,000 pounds of CO2 during their production. So you're saving that.
Yeah, that's a great way of recycling your old car and reducing CO2 emissions.
Yeah, it's great. Although I do love asterisks. So one more asterisk. I mean, you could take your old car and send it to the junkyard and eventually have that steel in the car recycled. And the recycling of the steel would save some of that 10,000 pounds of CO2, probably 3/4 of it. So you might only be saving 2,500 pounds of CO2, but that's still pretty good. And of course, more on emissions. Once your gas guzzler is converted to electric, its CO2 emissions will be much lower than the gas version and similar to a factory-built electric. And then more good news, upgradability. So a converted electric car will use off-the-shelf parts. So when you want to upgrade something later, you're going to have a much easier time swapping it out. And that would be really hard to do in a factory-built car. And then the final piece of good news, doing a conversion lets you get the exact car you want as an electric. And this is probably the biggest thing. So for example, if the 1993 Mazda RX-7 holds a special place in your heart, as it does in mine, you can have an electric one, and that's priceless. So Teresa, if you could convert any car, what would it be?
So actually, there's something that I've always wanted to do, which is converting a bike into an e-bike. My uncle does that, and he uses these beautiful old vintage bikes with accessories from the Second World War, and he converts them into e-bikes as a hobby. He uses the old bags that have been used for transporting documents between military stations per bike in the Second World War, and he hides the motor and the battery in these vintage bags. It's beautiful. This is such a great hobby. I would like to pick it up. Unfortunately, it's an expensive one. I think he invests around €3,000 in each piece, but maybe we will do an episode about e-bikes one day. That would make me very happy.
Yeah, for sure. And the €3,000 is still a lot less than doing a car.
Yeah, but we're still talking about a bike. But I don't know how much e-bikes are when you buy them new, but probably a bit less. I think like €2,000. Yeah, anyways. Another positive aspect about EV conversions that you have not mentioned so far is, in my opinion, the most important one, which is fun and doing it for passion. I mean, working on converting your old gas car in an electric vehicle is just a lot of fun.
Yep, I agree. And it's also not too complicated if you make the right choices and get good advice.
So let us quickly wrap up the most important infos of this episode. If you want to make your own DIY conversion, you will need a donor car, which is preferably not too new and has a manual transmission. Furthermore, it should be not too heavy, but still have enough room for the battery cells.
Right, and then you'll need to get a battery and its management system, a speed controller, a brake vacuum system, and some other electronics depending on your particular situation.
And the conversion would cost around $20,000, which is about 27,000 Canadian or 18,000 euro, plus the cost for the donor car. For safety reasons, we highly recommend to consult with professionals, but if everything goes well and you live in North America, registration is easy and soon you can drive around in your own DIY converted electric vehicle.
Yeah, and even if the conversion doesn't always make economic sense, it's still a great way to save energy and reuse materials that otherwise would have ended up incinerated or in landfills. It's a personalized vehicle, and then it can always be upgraded over time. And plus, as you said, working on it is a lot of fun.
Thank you for hanging out with us and chatting about EV conversions today. We would love to hear if there is someone amongst the listeners who has experience with EV conversions. Send us an email to electricvehiclepodcast@outlook.com and tell us all about it, please.
Yeah, and don't hesitate to reach out for any comments or topic discussions in general. You'll find all the references in the show notes, and then other ways to connect with us are through Facebook or Patreon.
That's right. Patreon is a platform that makes it possible to support your favorite content creators by making little donations starting at $1 per month. Patrons then have access to more content and can listen to the public episodes earlier than anyone else. With that being said, thank you so much for hanging out with us today, and let us talk about electric vehicles again next Monday. Have a great week, and bye!
Bye!